Is the coronavirus pandemic a chance to tackle climate change? Scientists say we shouldn't forget the dangers of the warming planet for all, from major economies to small island nations. So, can recovery from a global health crisis help heal our environment as well? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Nick Clark. Welcome to this special edition of Inside Story in collaboration with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Now, we're all sadly well aware of the crisis brought on by the coronavirus pandemic, but many experts are saying the world also urgently needs to refocus on a far more dangerous threat, the reality of runaway climate change. With attention focusing on COVID-19, the impacts of a warming world rage on, with our climate changing faster than predicted. Right now, record-breaking wildfires are burning in large areas of California. This northern summer, meteorologists have recorded the highest temperatures ever seen from Los Angeles to the Arctic. The Atlantic hurricane season is upon us, and already breaking records with storm after storm piling up, and disastrous flooding from Senegal and Sudan to Bangladesh and Kenya. And all the while, the polar ice sheets are melting, adding to the ongoing threat of sea level rise. COVID-19, though, many say, presents an opportunity for the world to act urgently and change course.
We are facing two critical crises, COVID and climate change. Let us tackle both and leave future generations with the hope that this moment is the true turning point for people and planet. I have proposed 6 climate-positive actions to recover better. Invest in green jobs, do not bail out polluting industries, end fossil fuel subsidies, take climate risks into account in all financial and policy decisions, work together, and most important, leave no one behind. Many countries and cities are now prioritizing green investments in their post-COVID recovery plans.
Well, small island states, as I say, from the Pacific to the Caribbean, are very much at the front line of the climate crisis, bearing the brunt of sea level rise and the devastating impacts of extreme weather. Yet they account for less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. For some communities, it's already too late, as rising seas have inundated homes and businesses. So what can be done to fix this deepening emergency for island nations? Are developed countries honouring their commitments to help? And if not, why not? And how do we take advantage of the trillions of dollars of COVID stimulus packages to ensure the world emerges cleaner, greener, and safer for all? All right, let's bring in our guests on this panel for discussion. As part of the IFRC's Climate Red virtual conference in the Caribbean island of Grenada, Senator Simon Stiell, who's Minister of Climate Resilience and the Environment. In the Marshall Islands in the Pacific, Brooke Takala, standing by for us, Secretary General of the Marshall Islands Red Cross Society. And in Geneva in Switzerland, Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. A warm welcome to you all. Brooke Takala, let's start with you in the Marshall Islands, if I may. So you live on this island nation encircled by the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. The danger is right there, up close. Give us a sense of what the Marshall Islands is going through now, what you're experiencing, and what the future holds.
We experience the impacts of climate change daily, and we have compounded impacts. So it could be king tides, high tides. Our reef systems are suffering because of ocean acidification, sea level rise, and yet we have to keep living day to day and responding to all of these impacts. And it's stressful. It's stressful to have those compounded impacts. And on top of that, we're still dealing with the legacy of the nuclear testing that was conducted here.
Of course. Now, you have to deal with emergencies as a first responder, but you're also living these experiences, these threats, all the time and every day. Tell us more about how the communities have to cope when flooding, when the king tides come in, for example.
For example, a king tide, all of our staff and volunteers are mobilized, and we have to take care of our families as well, assist in evacuating our families, and then go back into the communities, and then go back and assist with cleaning up, and it's and then go right back into our daily duties right then.
Right, and when you say cleaning up, what sort of things are you seeing? Like, what are people living with?
After tidal events, you know, we're a small island nation. We don't have lots of ways to dispose of our garbage, and it could be organic waste. It could be waste from the dump, damage to houses, damage to grave sites, eroding coastlines, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy.
Are you worried for the existence of your nation?
Worried somewhat, but I'm more on the hopeful side, to be honest. None of us are willing to give up, so we are all fighting and we are all working together, and I think we all have to err on the side of hope. Absolutely. Optimism is the word, isn't it?
Well, let's cross the world. Let's go 14,000 kilometers away to the island nation of Grenada in the Caribbean Sea. And Senator Stiell in Grenada, what impacts are you experiencing there? Tell us about your experiences there and how climate change is manifesting itself there in the Caribbean.
I think the presentation we just had from Brooke in the Marshall Islands is typical of what we're experiencing here in Grenada as well. And I think it is a common story and a common thread that runs through the challenges and the experiences of all small island developing states, whether it's in the Caribbean, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, wherever. These are truly challenging times. Climate change is here. It is very real. And as a government, it is an extreme challenge, not only dealing with our ordinary day-to-day national development priorities, educating our children, ensuring the healthcare of our citizens, infrastructure. All of those things that we face as a developing nation are now compounded by the extreme threats and the impacts that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis of climate change. And that has significant economic challenges for us. And as we look forward and we see the global responsibility that exists in terms of collective climate action, ensuring that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that we ensure that the temperature rise is contained within that 1.5 degrees C envelope. We see it only getting worse. So as a government, we have to grapple with those realities, plan for the future. And as small island developing states, we are showing the ambition that is called for at a global level. However, that ambition and the action that we can take is severely constrained by our local resources and the limited fiscal space we have to carry out those actions.
Okay, let me move on. Let me move on to Jagan Chapagain. Thanks for setting out your stall for us there, both of you there in Grenada and in the Marshall Islands. But Jagan Chapagain, you're Secretary General of an organisation that's declared the climate crisis a dire humanitarian emergency. The world, of course, has been dealing, as I said earlier, with another emergency, and that's coronavirus. How do you think the potential impacts of climate change down the line compare with what the world is experiencing now, here in 2020, with coronavirus, COVID-19?
Thank you so much for the question. Of course, right now, we are, of course, preoccupied with the response to coronavirus. It touches almost every country on earth and, of course, affects millions of people and killing hundreds of thousands. There have been a couple of very interesting learning from COVID. One is, of course, totally new way of working. And some of this new way of working also actually allows us to find a way to work in a more environmentally friendly manner. The second thing the COVID-19 has taught us is that we have to come together as a globe. We live in a global village. So if we don't come together, it's not possible to respond to the crisis like the COVID-19. And some of these lessons also apply to the climate crisis. Sometimes we see, this narrow thinking around this country is affected or that country is affected by the climate, and I'm sort of untouched type of thinking. Unfortunately, will not going to help us. A country in the Pacific island or the Caribbean affected, the whole global economy is so interconnected. If one part of the world is affected by a climate change, it affects the rest of the world. You remember a few years ago when Bangkok was flooded, the whole supply chain was affected all around the world because Bangkok supplies many of the raw materials and the production materials to the world, manufacturing world. So one of the key lessons from the COVID to the climate crisis would be that we have to respond to this as a global all together. Now,
can I just jump in there and just ask you one thing? In terms of the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis that we've seen across the world, do you think a climate emergency would create far more stress around the world, far more danger and difficulties for people?
It's probably not fair to compare one crisis with the other. Of course, the COVID is having a very severe impact right now. But what I feel is, with the advance of the vaccine technology, hopefully would be available next year, the medical advance that's happening, the countries that are learning to adapt, probably in a couple of years' time, we will find a way to deal with the pandemic. But the climate, just the scale of the climate is far severe and far, it will have far longer impact. And it will have a multiple impact on the life and livelihoods of the ordinary population. It will have impact, of course, the economic impact on how the countries, the finances will be managed in the long run, and the whole ecosystem can have a serious impact on actually the survival of the human beings in the long term. So, if we think from that perspective, the severity and the depth of the impact of climate change on the people, I think would be very, very severe. I cannot think of any other crisis that could have the type of impact the climate will have on the life on Earth.
Right. Brooke, Takala, given that nations like yours had nothing to do with causing global warming, that's down to the big industrialized nations, yet your very existence, or your way of life at least, is threatened because of it, what responsibility should be borne by the major economies?
Mitigation. We have no choice but to adapt to climate change and constantly adapting our shorelines, adapting our ways of life. And I think the larger economies, the larger states, they have a great responsibility to mitigate those impacts so that frontline communities from small island states, large ocean states, indigenous communities do not have to continue adapting and to take on that responsibility and to fully fund investment schemes like GCF so that we have access to assistance when we need it.
Right, and Senator Stiell, 2020, of course, was supposed to be a crucial year for the climate, with the first true test of the Paris Agreement, industrialized nations supposedly pledging to step up their ambitious climate plans, but COVID brought whatever momentum there was to a shuddering halt. How much of a setback has 2020 been in terms of making progress on climate change?
It is a setback. However, it gives us an opportunity as a global community, as the UNFCCC, to look at some of the sticking points that have existed since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. There are some critical issues that have been kicked down the road over the past 5 years, whether it's agreement on the Paris rule book, whether it's issues such as loss and damage, which is so important to small island developing states, the commitment for the $100 billion per year commitment from developed nations in support of mitigation and adaptation financing.
But that was supposed to come in this year, wasn't it, in 2020?
absolutely, and the call for ambition with the new NDCs. So I believe we should take advantage of the additional time that we have it's an opportunity for the UK government, who now holds the COP presidency, to work with nations, developed and developing nations alike, to have an inclusive approach in the negotiations. And let us get to the core issues that, as a global community, we've been unable to address since Paris. So the opportunity is to take advantage of the additional time so that the output of Glasgow in 2021 is actually meaningful and reflective of the ambitions and the goals that were set back in 2015 in Paris.
And Secretary General Jagan Chapagain, as you alluded to, COVID-19 has actually, or the lessons of COVID-19 have presented opportunities, not least through the trillions of dollars of stimulus packages. To what degree has the potential for progress improved because of the vast sums of money that nations can throw at recovering from COVID-19, but also at a cleaner, greener future, which will help the small island nations down the line?
I think this is a very, very important point, and I want to build on what Senator Stiell said. I think a lot of times the amount of energy spent on negotiations and discussions and meetings and the conferences, I think if we start moving the focus towards action, that will be, I think, very, very important. The resources are available. Resources have always been available. Billions of dollars of resources have been available. And of course, for the COVID recovery, there is even more resources coming in. But the fundamental mistake I believe that is happening is we haven't been able to integrate the climate smart approaches in our normal development. We have been investing billions of dollars in the normal development activities, but somehow we seem to keep a development on the one side and look for resources for the climate action on the other side. And of course, the amount of resources available are not infinite. So what we need to do, and the governments and the organizations like ourselves have to focus is, we need to get the climate smart approaches, climate smart development in our normal development activities, in our normal humanitarian response activities.
Right, but the thing is, Secretary General, again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in there again. It's easy to say that we need to do these things, but just yesterday, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that too much stimulus spending has already gone to reinforce carbon-centric policies. And won't that just be the whole story? It'll be just a wasted opportunity. How do we make sure that money goes in the right direction here?
And I think that's exactly where the government, particularly, and of course, when it comes to the humanitarian action like ourselves, the organization like ourselves, we have to stay true to our words. We go and make declaration in Paris and we go and declaration in New York. But when we go back home, we go back to our old habits. And this is something has to come from inside ourselves, from inside our own government. You know, to protect our climate, to protect the future for our children and their children, it doesn't have to be imposed by someone else. The governments have powers to make difference in their own countries. And as a Secretary General, I should have that commitment to make that changes in my own organization. So really changing that rhetoric into the real commitment is the big issue. And somehow we are looking for international rules and regulations to impose on ourselves. Why do I need an international binding regulations to steer my organizations into the commitment I have made? I think that's the type of responsibility the global leaders have to take. Otherwise, we will keep on spending time on new summits, new declarations, and we're looking for ways to enforce them, but not really changing our behavior.
Right.
And that's why the self-discipline is the most important characteristics the leadership should have.
Absolutely. Senator Stiell, your Prime Minister said last year that Grenada and other small island states are not prepared to play a waiting game, waiting for the major economies to come to the fore and come to your rescue. But realistically, Senator, what's the alternative?
As a small island developing state, we have to show leadership. And I believe that that is something that is in question at a global level. We're at the front line of the impacts of climate change. We have no choice. This is a matter of life and death for us. So with or without the support of the international community, we will do those things that we know we need to do and can do ourselves. But we're also realistic and recognize We cannot do all that is necessary without that international support. And in an environment where there is a leadership vacuum, then we, as small island developing states, are stepping forward to demonstrate that leadership. But as the Secretary General said, we have to convert the rhetoric and the words into concrete action. And I think one of the areas where there isn't enough focus is recognizing that climate smart action is actually good business. Good business at a local level, good business at a global level. However, the need for the political will to make those necessary transitions that are required for us to get onto that path is what we're battling with right now.
Right. Brooke, Takala, in the Marshall Islands, this phrase, greener, cleaner future, trips off the tongue, doesn't it? Talking about reducing emissions, electric cars and so forth, different forms of sustainable energy. But for you, the land is literally disappearing under your feet. All of that won't help the predicament that you are in right now. What do you need to happen?
I think we need people to realize that they also, everyone has a moral obligation to this place, to the Pacific, to ocean states, and that our ocean health directly impacts human health. So again, for investment to be accessible to for larger states to take that political will and like the other two guests have said, to turn that into action. And we will just keep doing the on the ground work because we have no choice here.
Secretary General in Geneva, has a global response to COVID given you hope that the world can come together to solve what is this greater, more dangerous problem?
You know, I'm a little bit with my colleagues from the Marshall Islands. I really want to be on the hopeful side. And as COVID has shown, if we understand the problem in front of us, I think the one difference probably between the COVID and the climate is that the COVID impact is just in front of us. We are seeing our friends and families being affected by this. So that's why there is an urgency in action. And unfortunately, in the climate, we are not seeing the same level of urgency in action. But what COVID did demonstrate is that if the world comes together and puts all its resources together, especially the scientific collaboration we are seeing different countries, we can make progress. And I absolutely believe the same is possible when it comes to climate. And there we need to have a two approach. One is a global solidarity. I think that's extremely, extremely important. Both the other speakers talked about that. But there is also importance to focus on your own domestic action. If every government is doing what they are supposed to do in each of their countries, it will have a global impact. So both elements need to get the same emphasis, global solidarity, but at the same time, domestic action. In each of your own countries, you are reducing the carbon emissions. You are investing in the nature so that there is a higher level of absorption capacity in the carbon. You are creating the green job. You are investing in the clean energy. You are investing in the clean industry. If that is done everywhere in the world, that helps the world. So that type of global and domestic approach needs to go hand in hand. But I'm very, very hopeful that the world will come together. We are seeing the impact on lives and livelihoods more and more. And this will create both moral obligation, but I also believe that it will create a political obligation for the leadership to come together.
Well, to the three of you, I wish we had another half hour of time, but we don't. We've run out of time. We do appreciate your contribution to the programme. Thanks to all our guests, Simon Stiell, Brooke, Takala and Jagan Chapagain. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the IFRC for collaborating with us on this special edition of Inside Story. And you can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, it's goodbye for now.